was still muted. So let me try again. Good morning. I think I was StreamYard muted there. It is Friday, July 4th. To all of our viewers, whether you're watching now or in the future, happy Independence Day, right?
Yes. Independence Day for us here in the United States.
Or here in the United States, yeah.
Yeah.
And even our friends across the pond in the UK, happy friendship to you. It's funny. This morning, and I don't think she intended it on purpose, but just before I came up here, downstairs Hamilton was on, and it was actually one of the scenes where King George comes out and complains about independence, and I thought, well, that's fitting.
Yes, it's funny. That's exactly the image I thought of when you said to our friends across the pond.
Yeah, send battalion of my love is exactly that part of that. It's just a funny part of it. She teaches 9th grade law and government, and so when they get to independence, she has a series of shirts, which she also tends to use at July 4th time frame. And so one of them is it shows both the US flag and the British flag, and there's some other stuff on it too, and it says, "We are never ever ever getting back together." And so the kids laugh about it, but it's fun to hear her talk about how she explains independence and the Declaration of Independence being the love letter, the breakup letter,
yes,
with the UK. But
that's funny.
But yeah,
but it gives us a day off, and
yes, that's right. And that's why it's almost an hour later than usual.
Yes, yeah. That we spent the first half hour just kind of catching up on some things. So good to see you. Good to get a chance to do a stream and not have some other things kind of impinge on our ability to do that. So happy Friday, everyone. Let's see. I know there was there's a banners. Sorry. Something I do want to mention to kind of kick off, and I wish I had something more tangible to point to, but I've heard our friend C# Fritz mention on his stream a couple of things that are coming up. So just to kind of share the information and awareness, C# Fritz is doing one of his famous workshops, and it's been a while since he's done one, but he's got a couple of really awesome topics coming up around that. One is on AI integration, and that's happening July 18th. So you got a couple weeks. It's 2 weeks from now, but it's a chance to. Don't believe there's any sign up for it from what I've heard. It's just basically come to his channel, which is on Twitch and YouTube at that C# Fritz handle, and go there July 18th. He's doing one on AI integration, so including AI in your applications. And then the one on July 25th is going to be focused on Aspire. And if you've seen Jeff's channel and some of this work he's been doing there, he's heavily invested in Aspire and using it to build out your applications with. So definitely a chance to go check that out. Those are both starting 9 a.m. here on the East Coast, which I think is -5 UTC still, potentially.
Yeah, I actually found, I remember being on his stream a couple days ago, and this was just a memory that I had that he talked about signups. So I actually found it.
Awesome.
Now, when I say signups, I think you're right. To be clear, they take place on YouTube and Twitch, so you can just show up.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I take it back. I think that YouTube's going to be part of it, but as you can see, if we bring this up, I don't know if you've already done it and beat me to it, but it's mobilized. Okay, then I'm gonna get this shared. Sorry that we're off to a great start here, aren't we? Let me get
Friday. It's all good.
So on mobilize.net, which I'm not going to pretend I have any idea. I really don't know. But since this is what came up and it has the links, then great. Check out with Gap Migrations, I guess. I don't know. Fritz and Friends, 2 free all-day .NET workshops, Friday, July 18th, just like you said, 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so that's US, which I want to say during daylight, aren't we UTC -4? And then the .NET Aspire workshop is a week later, same place, but there is a registration link, and I don't remember. Let's see. I don't remember if there was something. Oh, that's what it was. Is that if you do register, they have a swag bag and
cool.
so on. So,
nice. And we are UTC
yeah.
-4 this time of year. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm being totally unfair to Gap Migrations and Mobilize.net for not being too aware of this site. However, I kind of wonder if maybe, you know what, I'm not intending to. Jeff is doing a great thing here, but maybe this is sponsored in order to provide these swag bags, which is great.
Yeah,
great. Just, we knew that our friend Jeff was doing that, so and I suppose right, we can also point out that we very recently, we've talked about this on the show before, but I'll go ahead and show it here. Oh, look, it didn't add you or this. We recently did GitHub Copilot Bootcamp at Philly.net, and this simple short link to the content will take you right to the page you're looking at right now. And so this was at Philly.net. It wasn't recorded, but what I think is helpful is that if you check out here and scroll down a little bit, first of all, number one, there's a link to the guide on adding GitHub Copilot to Visual Studio Code for free. There's the link on the lab materials for the entire bootcamp, because there was no way we could tackle everything in that bootcamp in 2 hours. I mean, it is a huge set of labs. And then notes here on things like, for instance, here's Rich talking about GitHub Codespaces, and we talked about GitHub Copilot and had a hands-on lab, and Jeff Fritz showed off his copilot.john.com site, which sounds like it's really doing pretty well, actually. He was mentioning that it's getting quite a few visits, people showing up and getting hints on how to use Copilot effectively. And you can even, at the very end, I've kind of got this is everything. If you want all kinds of labs, there's a lot here. There's a lot of labs here that you can go through to learn about these different features, and especially some things that we've been doing on this show too, which is like we have been using Copilot now and then.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So
that's the link there too. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I dropped that link in there, and we'll also get them on the YouTube channel.
Nice. All right, we'll hide that. Nice. So a little bit of social awareness and what's coming up in the area. Regardless of your area, it's online, so you're good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just the time zone issue and make sure you're awake for it. That's all.
Definitely. So today, we've been working on various aspects of a user group management app that actually, I think the target is go online by the end of the summer, I would hope.
Which we're halfway through the summer, so
yeah, it's going pretty quick. So we have some basic functionality going. We have a back end using Azure Cosmos DB for NoSQL, and one of the pieces that I know you've been working on is I don't, there may be a term for this, like an industry term for this, but like, for lack of a better term, like a metadata API,
right?
Which I think part of the point of it, this may not be the only point of it, so I'll let you describe it, but I think part of the point of it is to be data driven in a lot of the way the site works, instead of us, coding it into the app.
Mm-hmm. It's spot on. So yeah, probably the easiest thing to do is to code some of those, what are the lookup lists? What are the values we want to use for status of an event, or things we want to use for The status event's a big one, but I think about the other one that might come up is ultimately having metadata driven information around something like location, right? So an organization might have a certain number of places where they'll do their meetup events. Gotta stop using that word. Where they start using their meeting events and have those be possible to select from. So that's kind of the idea of, well, if it's just stored as metadata in a repository somewhere, then it's up for us to then be able to programmatically include. So let me share this. Cool. So this is well, a couple of things here. So one is I basically, all of the PRs that we did last time, I just did pulled them down, did a merge. So my local branch of this, which is the metadata branch, is essentially up to speed with what's checked in main. I was able to fast forward. There were no issues in doing any of that. So all of that looked good. So that's a good thing. So basically what that means at the end of the day here, we can basically check this in and have it say post show, what have you, but will still be up to date with everything that Chris has done over the last couple shows. So that's good news. Point two is it was probably the last weekend, spent some time, doing a little bit of conversation with Copilot, because that's what I do when I can't talk to Chris. And I go ahead and had coming up with some idea. Well, if I wanted to create this metadata information, how might we do it? And it actually was kind of interesting because it took a lot of the cues and structure from what Chris did around the meetings, right? So if we think about, hey, we've got, let's go into our application here, and I don't need Copilot right now, so we can close that. Basically, we can kind of work back and say, okay, go back to our core data and maybe blow this up a little bit so it's a little easier to see. We essentially have here, we've got a meeting repository. Well, we probably want to go ahead and create a metadata repository, because ultimately this data is, at least right now, we can make a decision change later, but the plan right now is to store this in another Cosmos DB container that sits alongside the meeting container. So we'll have a separate repository that points to that. We've got, much like we have, this is the one we have to talk about here in the metadata services and where that really belongs, because we can just talk through it, because there are different places where that might need to be. A metadata definition, so a class that kind of defines, well, what is a metadata object and what that means. So just kind of starting to group all of that. And for me right now, I'm just kind of putting this in the orbital core component. But then we also get to, not our app host, but certainly on our API, we actually have a whole nother metadata endpoint that we've got in place here. So instead of having our meetings API, which right now is sitting inside of the program.cs project or class, I basically created a separate one so that they don't interrupt or they don't collide with each other, just to kind of keep things clean. So that's where this metadata endpoint is. Like, well, that's great, you're using minimal API, so how do you bring that in? Mm-hmm. I said, well, that's a good question. So essentially,
I think at some point we'll want to move these APIs out too. But yes, this is pretty common.
So this is what we're doing here, is we're actually registering the metadata endpoints by calling out to the map metadata endpoints class that we have. So that's how we get that all in one place. So we could split everything that we have essentially up in this section here off into its own class, and then at the end call app.map meetings API endpoints, right?
Yeah.
Which I think we want to do.
Yeah, this is a pretty common approach, actually, is and then I'd be curious if when you go into the metadata endpoints extension method, did it use map group? It did. Okay, so map group is a way to essentially kind of say, here's a group of APIs that they hang off of this part of the URL, right?
Right.
So everything underneath gets API slash metadata. Now you didn't do this, and it's not necessary. I don't want to say necessary, but theoretically, the group could be defined elsewhere. So the actual location where the APIs were going to live could be defined elsewhere, injected in, and then you'd have a little bit of flexibility there. But I would also argue that I don't see that approach that often because I don't know what that flexibility really buys you. When you
As
when you
opposed to
publish
having
an
everything
API,
all in one space.
yeah, I mean, like oftentimes as developers we reach for like flexibility, but when we publish APIs, web-based APIs, it's kind of like publishing, NuGet packages or heck, go back to the Win32 API.
Mhm.
What you do is cast in concrete a little bit because changing it hurts your consumers
Right.
or breaks them if in the worst case. So
Absolutely.
it's not realistic that you're going to run around, not super realistic, I think, that you're going to run around saying, oh, well, today this group of APIs is going to be slash this and tomorrow it's going to be slash that. I'm sure
Yeah.
somebody would have a great use case for that in the comments though. So if you do, I'd actually
Yeah, I'd
love
love
to know.
Yeah.
When have you used map group for a more dynamic experience? Anyways, the point is, here it is. So
Yeah. So that's the API and the metadata, and at least the initial part of it getting into the orbital core and a separate section in here for the metadata section. I was just trying to figure out different ways to groups, or not different ways. I was trying to figure out a way to continue to consistently group stuff. So, and then also down here in our data, we have our metadata repository now created. If we go down to our orbital web, and this is where we have some things to think about. We have our collection here of services, and there's the original metadata or meetings HTTP client that you created. There's also what I created here, which is an HTTP client for the metadata, which I thought made sense, where I'm interested in thinking about, you have an iMeeting service inside of web. Right now, my meeting service is sitting up inside of core, and I could probably move it down here, but I'm wondering if that changes any other dependencies that we might have. So just going in and looking at the references that list here, we've got this is a pretty cool way of showing it inside of VS Code here. And then I click on this, and I've got a couple of different locations where it exists. Obviously, one of those is right here inside of this service, but the other is down inside of the metadata HTTP client, which lives in web. I think the only hesitancy is that up here, this is also referencing core models, but
right.
I'd love to talk it out.
So I think right off the bat, the iMeeting service that's built for orbital.web is probably misplaced. I think. Let's see. The way we're using this is the HTTP clients implement that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It might be possible. It might be even plausible to say that even the HTTP clients are misplaced. And so the reason is that I say that is I kind of like the litmus test that I'm using in my head. Is there anything about both the clients and the service that could be used in an app other than the web app? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think so too, because you could just have potentially something else calling the API and not living in web. Like, let's say we did a mobile, right?
Yep. A mobile app. I like to use the example of a console app. Not that a console app is super useful, but what if I wrote a quick console app and I just said, just list the next 10 meetings? Well, those same services and interfaces could be used. So the distinction here, and naming is hard, but in orbital.api, it almost feels like, well, not orbital.api, I'm sorry. Well, actually, I guess I'm right. In orbital.data, we have the repositories.
Yes.
But the repository interface is sitting in core data. Yep. I think that makes sense too. So it can kind of feel a little redundant. I'm not saying this is bad, but it can kind of feel a little redundant that we have an access to the data in iMeeting repository, but then we have an access to, I feel like it's just a layer up in of abstraction of, I don't care what you're doing with this. Here's how I interact with meetings.
Right.
And that's the iMeeting service.
Yes, and that took me a while to get my head around. Like, we've got a repository that's talking to the data. Why do I need something else that's abstracted talking to the data? But you're absolutely right. That gives you the flexibility to call the repository via a common interface of that service, regardless of what you're using to call it.
Yeah, I think the trick there is that your implementation, the implementation of iMeeting repository has to be tightly like laser focused on interacting with the data source, and avoid the temptation of doing anything more, including business logic. Right. So, and I think that's hard. I think that's harder than it sounds, because it's very easy to just start saying like, well, I've got the meetings back. Let me just do some businessy filter. And it's like, well, wait a second. I don't want you doing that, right? Like, you just get the data. Now, there's everything as a trade-off. So when I look at our Cosmos meeting repository, when I just happen to be looking at our Cosmos meeting repository, it seems to be doing a pretty good job of that. You inject the Cosmos client, it goes and tries to get the container, and then create meeting async just calls one thing. It calls create item async. That's it. And I know this isn't up on stage for you right now, but I feel like we've done a pretty good job there. It's possible that for many instances, that additional layering isn't valuable. But if you have any business logic to perform at all, like, the only thing I can think of is this, at least right now. Imagine if we wanted to save a meeting, but before we did so, we wanted to run the meeting description through some kind of moderation filter. Sure. Just to do a quick check. Is there profanity? Is there inappropriate content? You wouldn't want that in the repository.
Right.
But you might want to do that you might want to do that regardless of repository. So whether the repository is Azure Cosmos DB, or whether it's SQL Server, or whether it's a JSON text file or in memory, you still want to do that check. So that logic, now it sounds like we're writing some other service too, but that is consumed at the very least and operated on in the service, not in the. So naming that is hard, because I've often struggled with iMeeting service versus iMeeting repository, and wondering about the redundancy there. So
I think it makes it, I don't. Well, that's so. Yeah, I mean, is there really any difference between iMeeting repository and what it implements and iMetadata repository? Well, yeah, there's some additional methods here around, well, what does it mean to create the metadata components, right? So create, update, delete, which isn't in the iMeeting repository. Well, it is. You've got this here.
I think it's a matter of asking yourself, which direction do you want to go? Because you can go two directions.
Yeah.
You can play the YAGNI card. You ain't going to need it. And say, I'm going to start with the repository, and we will add a service layer when we discover we need business functionality that's separate from talking to the data store. The pro to that is you not gold plating, not implementing something you don't need, over engineering. All of those pros are easy. I suppose the con is, if you figure this out later in the project, how much has to change to consume the new service. And that's the trade-off, right? Like, to sit here and say you and I are going to have the answer for every project ever made is not possible.
No. Yeah, and I think that's something we struggle with. For me, that is something that certainly I struggle with, in saying, I know that things should get implemented in this way where, we have the ability to switch those things out. But oftentimes that winds up leading to just getting something down and done. And, all of those design decisions you're trying to incorporate now at the beginning. And maybe you should just write for the first case, but keep that first case flexible with the services and the interfaces, such that if you need to add the new thing on in the future and change your interface slightly, then that's what happens.
Yeah. I mean, so we're not paid. There's Doug Crockford, I think, was famous. I thought he was famous for saying we are not paid to use every feature of a language. He was saying this about JavaScript, but I think it can be applied to any mature programming language, especially some of the ones longer in the tooth, like Java, C#, and so on. C++, right? We're not paid to use every feature in the language. I think there's a corollary to that, which is we're not paid to write beautiful code. However, and I have friends who would hear me say that right now and they would cheer. However, there is a benefit to two classes of code, beautiful and maintainable. Right. If your code is maintainable, then that means you're not resistant. Your code is not resistant to change. It is not difficult to do. It's not difficult to do reasonable things based on new requirements. When we have that ball of mud, it's because we know the business has come to us and said, can you add a thing? And you just cringe thinking about, oh, that's going to affect so many things. Okay, now your code's not maintainable.
Right.
There's a slight pivot there for me between maintainable and beautiful. Code can be maintainable and not necessarily read like a book. And again, I'm going to use my own definition for beautiful code here. Code I think is beautiful when you open it and your brain literally has to do no human compiling to understand what is happening. Mm-hmm. You just go, oh, okay. And that could be because you've taken the time to take complex predicates, like a complex if condition, or maybe you are using link, and so you're using predicates and so on. You've taken the time to take a complex predicate and boiled it down to eligible for transfer. Mm-hmm. Or you've created some method, like if I'm making up some kind of library app here, if book dot is eligible for transfer. Now, from a business perspective, I open it and I go, oh, the code says right here, if the book's eligible for transfer, then we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, if the business person asks, what does that mean? Well, then you can go into that method and you can see the answer. That doesn't mean that code isn't maintainable if you don't go to that level. It still might be maintainable. It's just like how quickly we're able to find the thing, change the thing, ship the thing, and not break everything else. Right. So I don't think we're going the wrong way. I do think, however, that a lot of what you're doing now in core is that we can even find ourselves moving meetings there. And I think my litmus test is going to be, well, you just mentioned it, a mobile app. I do believe that a mobile app will be very useful. And I know this is just me. This is a crutch for me. It's been a crutch for me for a long time. Is can I build a console app that does all these things just from the command line? My crutch used to be WinForms. Okay. I used to build WinForms apps that would just real quick side project. Let me build a WinForms app, consume all the interfaces. And if they all work fine, then maybe my interfaces are onto something that I can take them from place to place and they work great. Yeah. I even did this. You might be surprised. I did this for a whiteboarding app. So the whiteboarding app, it used SignalR, and so multiple clients could connect to it, and you could draw a line, and that line would appear on the next. I know this is very common technology now, but at the time it was pretty new. SignalR was pretty new, and so this was pretty cool idea. Is you could draw a line and the line would appear over here. The other thing you could do that was really cool, which you can do in whiteboarding apps now, is you could lasso a bunch of the stuff you've drawn and then shrink, move, rotate. And so that was great to solve that whiteboarding problem of I've run out of space on the whiteboard.
Right. How do
I wish I would have made this diagram a little smaller. I wish I would have drawn it a little more in the corner. Well, fine. Lasso it and move it, no problem. Yeah. And it was a really cool app. But to validate the interfaces, my first version of it was actually a WinForms app, and it wasn't rendering anything. It would just, when you drew a line, the WinForm, and this was to validate the interfaces for communication, the Signal R piece. I didn't want to bake it into Signal R. I wanted them to be independent interfaces. And so the idea was that if I went to this whiteboard and I drew a line, and then I looked at the WinForms app and it said line drawn from here to here, perfect. And then I even had some buttons where I could put coordinates in and say, okay, add a line, and boop, it would pop up over there. Nice. And as I was moving lines, I would see the coordinates scrolling. You know, the coordinates would be, the numbers would be scrolling up and down as I was moving them back and forth. And the purpose of it was not for vanity. It was to say, like, okay, to me, this validates that we have a good separation of data and business method for communication, what I'm sending across the wire.
No, that's cool. And I think that's what we're, without going to that level of creativity or of inclusion in the app, we're just trying to make sure that we've got the capability to do those things, which I think we're heading in that right path.
Yeah, right. So I think in the end, what we're going to see is some of the stuff that I have sitting in the web app should probably move here, just like you've done, right? And I also think what's interesting now is you've sort of stumbled into vertical slice architecture by putting the metadata stuff in the metadata folder instead of a models folder. Not good or bad. It's not good or bad. It's just a thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, is as you say that, I was sitting here looking at this, which, sorry, I did a copy. Undo?
Yeah, I just copied it. Maybe Control Z will do it, or maybe not.
It did not. Let's get rid of it. With recycle, that's fine. That was too easy. Whatever it was I was doing. So if I do this, I was actually looking at that file there and thinking, does that belong there, or does it really belong here? as we were talking. So
yep. Now, you know, and here's the thing where some of these terms mean different things to different people, so I want to be careful. But like clean architecture sort of promoted, you know, a very similar way to lay out your projects, but it usually would be like controllers, models, things like that. Where vertical slice architecture is promoting, and this is very broad brush, so I'm not, you know, don't take this as, please go learn about vertical slice architecture on your own. But or maybe we cover it in another show, right? Is with a very broad brush, it's the idea that one of the things that you would benefit from it is that you would look just right at your project and know immediately what each of these folders covers, instead of, well, what's in models? Yeah.
Why is that different?
Or bouncing around.
That's different.
I got to change the model, and now I got to go find the interfaces folder to change the interface, and now I got to go find the controllers folder to change the controller. It's like, we're together. We live together.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I will say, well, to some extent, right? So this metadata definition is a base class for the individual definitions or classes that need to be put in place for the various properties that are going to be on the meetings model. So in this case, event status being that one that is kind of what I use to kind of start this whole thinking process around. There's going to be a class that's based off of the underlying metadata definition, and having that that was why I switched it to. So I can see there being multiple models. So it's not, and maybe I'm doing it wrong, but it's not true vertical slice, because right now I was thinking there's not as living models, but because they're implementations of that base class.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, look, it's not, the point isn't, it's funny how sometimes you stumble into what maybe there might be YouTube videos and design about. And what I think is neat is when you stumble into it organically, then it sort of validates it and it says, oh, I think I understand the point of this now. Maybe I will go learn more about the thing, because the first time I tried to learn about the thing, it confused me. I just said like, oh, that looks nice, but what's a real world example? Uh-oh, I just created it. Right. I just stumbled into it.
So this is good. And I think what we need to do now is finish the wiring up of this so that we can maybe, if we're lucky, at the very least get it to compile. But beyond that, can we change the edit, the portion of the meetings page that does the add item, and put a drop down in there that would have those values? That might be a lot to do in however long we're going to go, because obviously we're not stopping at 9 o'clock.
That's true. Yeah, we're off today.
Exactly. So in here, I got the red squiggle because there's an issue, right? Because it doesn't know where that is, but it's actually coming from core metadata. So we're going to add that to here. So that helps. I think the other thing we need to do is find the program file for, there we go, that one, the app host. And the reason for that is our app host here has the wiring up of the Cosmos DB object and gets us our database and our container. Now our database is not changing, but our container certainly is, because we want to go ahead and put different metadata inside of those other objects. So we would need to create another container. Since that's not going to exist right now, that's going to need to get created. And then I think we need to do something like what you did last time of check if the metadata container is empty and add seed data. Now this seed data is a little different in that it's not, something that's made up. It's what we know we want that data to be, right? It's not really made up. We know there are going to be certain values for event status, right? Canceled, deleted, rescheduled, whatever those things might be, right? So we want to make sure that it's a uniform collection of data. Now, I've not created any of that now, but I think it's one of those things that we definitely need to consider and include.
So when it comes to .NET Aspire, what we're doing on lines 16 through 20, I have been puzzling over this for a little while. And here's why. The main reason why is that when we look a little bit further down at Orbital API, we add the Orbital API project to the orchestration, and we capture that in an instance variable. I don't exactly remember what comes out of add project, but something comes out of it. Like we have a var there that you hover over it and we'll be able to see what it is. And then, an iResource, a project resource, I guess. An iResource better. Now, the key about that is because in the very next line of code, we are telling it, hey, Orbital Web needs this.
Right.
That's all for the purposes of service discovery. And you can also do little things like you can use other APIs that tell it to wait for it.
Mm-hmm.
Basically to say, like, I shouldn't even start unless this other thing is healthy.
Yeah.
Which we are not doing. I don't see that in our database, meaning that we are not using it as a reference. Well, actually, wait, am I right about that? So
let me go back. So say that part again.
I guess we are. It's being called, is the database being called Orbital, and then that's what we use? Oh no, the database is being called Cosmos DB. Database is being called Cosmos DB. That's on line 6. That's the reference that we're using, because I'm pretty sure what we find is in the rest of the application, we say Cosmos, we're not going to know the address. So Cosmos DB, I think, is the label getting slapped down. What I'm getting at is the seeding and creation and verification of the database. I've been thinking, should this be here or should it be somewhere else? And I hasn't been important enough to do anything about it right now, but I've just been thinking about it a lot. Like, should it be here, or should this portion where we say, hey, add the Cosmos database, is it more like add it if it doesn't exist, check and see its status, add the container, or, I don't know. It's not. I don't think it's super important, but
No, but it is something to consider, right? Because why are we defining all of the containers here instead of just defining the Cosmos DB client and sharing that client with whatever project winds up needing it?
yeah, it seems like there might be a use case for an admin API later where you say to yourself, okay, the website's up. Go forth and here the database is up. I'm sorry, the website's up, the APIs are up, but no database can be found because you didn't give me one. You didn't point me at your point me at your Azure Cosmos DB instance, and then
Right.
there'd be a button to be like start new database, and it would say like, okay, I'll add the database, I'll add the container, I'll add the metadata container, I'll get you going. But that's okay. I don't want to because you notice that right now the piece that knows how to seed this is sitting in the orbital API.
Yeah.
Which I actually did some other thinking about as well. Is the way I accomplish that. I don't know if you have that in here with the data seeder. I don't know that you have it, which is okay. It might be a little bit further up in the tree. I don't think it's been merged into main.
Oh, okay.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. Let me take a quick peek at what we've got. No, it is data seeding is a feature hanging off of main right now.
Okay, so it's not plugged
we'll have
back
to
in
cover
yet.
this. Yeah, we'll have to cover this on another show because I implemented that as a separate class in the web API and then immediately got to thinking like, this feels like something you would seed for a lot of different reasons. So why is it sitting in the API? And I even got to the idea of instead of having its own class, should this be something that I go to the iMeeting repository and add as a default implementation, which is a fairly new feature in C#, right?
Yeah.
And I bet you it's a feature a lot of people don't use, where you can take an interface and add implementation to it. And now implementations of that interface that don't override it or have their own, you get an implementation. So I played with it and it worked and I thought interesting. So
I just want to capture that there because I think that's pretty important, especially when you think as a default implementation. Because especially when you think about this, right? We certainly we have these things here of, we've got the database, we've got the container, but really all we're passing in is the Cosmos DB. That's all that's getting passed in over to, or the only reference that's being carried over to the Orbital API. So if that's the case, then why are we doing those pieces there? Let's just do this here, because over in the Orbital API, when we look at the program, cores. Yeah, here's our Cosmos client that we're basically using from that, or pulling from that reference, right? That reference here has to match the reference defined here. So that's essentially what we're doing, saying, go find me the reference that got created for this.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And then do it here. And then this is where we get into building our own scope meaning repository and the various containers that come off of it.
Yep. If I could, let me share for just a second, just to show you what I was talking about. So if you were here last time, then what you would see is that in the API itself, there was this work we did to seed meetings if there were no meetings in the repository, and I created a data seeder class with a static class, static method to do that. So last night I was playing around with the idea of like, why did I do that? What was the value? Does that help us long term? So you'll see now, if I zoom in over here, that data seeder is gone.
Oh,
because
okay.
what I experimented with was I said, let's go to the iMeeting repository, and why don't we just call seed meetings async on it? And you can even see that the IntelliSense is telling us seeds a repository with initial meeting data if none exists.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay, so now let's go to the definition of that. That's not sitting in a class. This is in the iMeeting repository interface. Now, we're used to seeing interfaces with this kind of stuff, the declarations of the methods. I don't remember which version of C# this came in on. Might have been 9, might have been something like that. I'm sure, man, it would be awesome if like Mads Torgensen watched this and said, like, I told us in the comments. But I added a default implementation. And so that means whether you're using Cosmo or SQL, the in-memory one, or SQL or anything, this will say, okay, well, whatever. The implementation knows how to do these things. I'm only calling those methods. So after it goes through all of the logic, it calls create meeting async. And then I looked at this immediately and said, like, oh, I wonder if this should be refactored out somewhere. But whatever. The point is it should work no matter what.
Right. And it's interesting because to include that in an interface, it feels like that almost should be in a base class implementation of the interface, right?
Yeah. Yep. Believe me, it felt weird, right? It felt like, But then I started thinking, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between having a meeting repository, which many people would start calling it like meeting repository base, and then they would require that every meeting repository has to derive off of it to get this functionality. Now, I'm not saying that inheritance has no use cases that aren't useful, but you've just added a hidden API to your app. I'm a new developer. I show up. I'm looking at code. I see that the code implements an iMeeting repository. And the first task I'm given is, hey, implement the SQL Server version of this repository. What is going to tell me? What is going to help me discover that I need that iMeeting repository to implement a class that inherits from this meeting repository base? Nothing's going to force me to do that. Now, granted, you could make the argument, well, didn't you read the rest of the other code? Yeah, sure. But to me, it creates this confusion or this uncertainty of, hold on, why do we have a meeting repository base? I got to go ask my colleagues now. And then what if they don't remember? Like, I don't know. I don't know why we have a meeting repository base, but we have it. So
interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not necessarily defending it like to say like everybody should follow this, but I thought, why, this seems like a good use of the feature. So I used it.
I like it because it's all, if I'm going to I go back in that same argument same thought process we just had, right?
So, like we're used to doing things a different way because that's how
we've always done it.
C# and object-oriented languages would do it. I mean, when you think about it, you could make the argument that an interface is nothing more than a special type of abstract class.
Yes.
I mean, an abstract class can have implementations, so here we are back where we started. But you could make that argument that it's really nothing more than an abstract class, and it's like, well, okay. So, anyways, that's where we're at there.
This is what happens on a Friday when we have no deadline and we just start talking. And this is why we did the show, because these are the things that Chris and I wind up talking about. It's like, this is cool. We should just turn the show on. So, all right. Oh, I am back to sharing. And that's,
we're back to you.
Okay. This, though, is what you want to see. Okay. So that's a good question. So we don't need to see this right now. We do need this. And I think for right now, we're fine by just having this. We don't need this. Let's just comment that out for a minute. and save this. And now if we go to, so we're just kind of walking through the pieces, right? We've got to, start to instantiate these components so we can make them happen. So if we go back to our API and our metadata endpoints over here, we've got this, we've got this. This was actually starting to give me some code around, well, what if you have attendance modes, right? Online, offline, in person, whatever, right? So it was trying to give me other properties. Right now, I'm just focusing on the event status property. So that's commented out for now. Where I don't see, because it would not be in here, right? So bringing in that Cosmos database inside of this project, which is what we did. So the API has access to that that class wouldn't matter. It would be the repository that needs to know which one we're bringing in. And I want to just make sure. What I'm trying to do is make the correlation between what we're doing here in the metadata repository and what we did in the meeting repository here. So this is, we do have a Cosmos client that we brought in. Okay, that's what I don't have, is this at bringing in the scoped meeting repository or the iMetadata repository. So I need to do that. I'm going to move this out of the way because in this new screen, I can't see your picture. So there's that. Builder. Excellent. Okay. So it's not liking any of that. So why is it not liking any of that? There we go. So anytime we call for that scoping, we bring that in. I think I'm still hanging up on this. Probably. Okay. Okay.
Hanging up on.
So how does, right now, all we've passed over is a client.
Yes, right.
So we got to go to the metadata repository to see how we, so that's going to bring in the client.
Right. We inject it
via dependency injection. Yep.
Yeah.
And then it also wants a database name and a container name. I don't know that we did that. Did we do that here? We didn't.
No.
We just brought in the client. Okay.
Because
this particular implementation.
hard-coded. Yeah, it's essentially hard-coded, which maybe is the way to start. And then, if it really needs to be configured, I'm not sure. I could see perhaps in a production environment, the administrator would want a little more control.
Yeah. And we may, by the time we go start deploying this to the cloud environment, we might want that as well.
Right, because some things that we have not explored at all in this application yet is things like configuration management, which includes both, what configuration management are we going to support, and is there going to be a way to plug that in here, and could somebody just solve a lot of these problems by simply adding environment variables to their deployment, or could they link in something a little bit stronger, like say Azure Configuration Management or whatever they want to use.
Yes. So what I'm doing here is I'm breaking this out because I already know that the container, at least right now, does not exist. So if I do double click. Oh, because it comes off the database. That's why. Okay.
Yeah. So in the Cosmos meeting repository, we only capture the client and the container, and we can just call client get container. And that's all that it needs to do now, unless there's something more that you're looking for.
So that's what I mean. So you're right. So we could do client dot get container, but the thing about get container is it returns a reference. It doesn't guarantee its existence.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. So
if we go back to here, what we did was we took the database and then we did add container. And what that's going to do is if it doesn't exist, it's going to add that container to the resource.
Yeah. Now, where does that come from? Does that come from the Cosmos DB API or from Aspire? See, it comes from Aspire.
Aspire. Yeah.
So we don't want to use that method specifically. That doesn't mean there isn't another method we can use. Just I don't think we want to use that one, because I personally have been trying to keep Aspire out of the repositories.
Yep. So that was why I was going down the path of doing database. And then let's see if we do dot. There's this method here, create container if not exist. And what that gives us, because that comes off of the, yeah, that's fine. Because we know it's this one, metadata, which is fine. And then this should be throughput properties.
Key path.
Sorry?
Then it also wants, well, there's a couple overloads here, so maybe you didn't pick the other overload. Yeah.
Right, which we know we had in place from the last one. Right, so we went slash type, and then we just want to be able to.
Oh yeah, look at that. Okay.
Not throughput. There we go. Where did that go? Because we just had that up there. The container. It's not. Oh, partition cath, right?
That's the one. Yeah.
We don't.
The rest are nullable.
But yeah, I could really just get rid of it.
Yeah, and you're supplying the same information that was required in add container, except that add container had an optional parameter for the container name. So we basically said, and the reason why is because I believe that that container was being defined as a reference named meetings in Aspire, so that we could now go to other apps and refer to it. In fact, I don't know, maybe we could have done that here, but I'm not 100% sure. It's like it says here, when I look at add container in the program.cs for the app host, the first parameter is just name, which I'm guessing means
a way to reference it.
Name. Yeah. And then after that, they're saying, well, what's the partition key path? And then what's the container name you want? And I'm thinking, I wonder if that meant we could refer to it in other parts of the app just by calling it meetings. I don't know.
I think I would think that's possible, but you would probably need to do this. Well, because then that wants to use the reference as is defined as the variable name instead of just meetings.
Well, that's okay, because if you give it that reference, then I think what that would allow you to do is go to the gosh, would that allow you to go to the repository and just call it, metadata container? I mean, you'd have to give it a name. Like, I don't know. We might have to look into that.
Yeah, that is interesting. But I think right now what I want to do is if we come back to the Cosmos meeting repository, it's just going to do get container. So what we'll probably have to do is go and create that container on our own to make sure it's there, knowing that for both of these, we're going to have to do some kind of a check to make sure that it is there before we get it. That makes sense?
It does. And I wonder if this is where we just had the whole discussion about in the app host, whether those things should be created there. And I wonder if this is where the .NET Aspire folks are like shaking their fist at the screen saying, we solved this problem for you. Stop trying to solve it. I don't know. I just I never got that far in my head that, hey, it's called meetings, but we could change the name of it. That's now a resource. So does it make sense to start referring to it everywhere? Or does it make sense for the app to take control of that? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, so that would be a reason why. So if I do just say kind of what we were doing, _client .get container and container orbital. And then do metadata. But hey, greetings, Waleed. Thanks for joining us. Let's see. So that would at least get us the right container. And then maybe what we're doing is not here, but to your point, at the app host layer, uncomment that. And then now we can make sure, because that will do an add container if it doesn't exist.
Yeah. And then do you have to add the reference so that Orbital API knows?
That's a good question. We shouldn't have to, because we don't take anything that sends container over to the meetings API, the meetings repository. So other than it being a check, I don't think there's anything we need to do there. I can now confidently call metadata as a container, knowing that it got added from that line there. So let's save this so that gets done. Let's go back to the metadata repository. We can save this, knowing that anywhere we do a container, as we do down through all the highlighted places here, it's going to be using our metadata container because that's what we created against it.
So I'm actually looking at the sample. I don't know if you want me to bring it up.
Go for it, yeah.
But I went to the documentation.
Okay.
And
we're doing it wrong?
No. But I feel like this whole question that just sort of came up. Okay, so where am I? I am in the Azure Cosmos DB. I'm in the Azure Cosmos DB page of the .NET Aspire documentation. So this is where integrations are covered. As we can see here, integrations, Azure, and then Azure Cosmos DB. Okay, so at the top of this page, they talk about the integration, and they say we have hosting integration models like a DB resource, a container resource, a database resource, and an emulator resource. Okay, great. And you can add the resource like it says here, and then it switches to Bicep. And I have to admit, this is probably where I stopped reading, because I said, okay, I don't need Bicep right now. So let's just move on. And what I didn't do is I didn't read this part where it talks about customizing, provisioning resources. Okay, fine. And then if you keep going, connecting to an existing account. Okay, great. But then now you're adding these resources, and we're doing this. We're adding resources. We're adding a container. We're doing all of this. But now check this out. Here, they've got a Azure Cosmos database. They've provisioned, provisioned, identified containers and so on. And then they said, oh, we have an API, and it has a reference to profiles, details, and history.
Right.
And then I don't know if they keep going. The preceding code adds named Cosmos with 2 databases, customers and orders. And the customers database has a container named profiles, while the orders database has 2. Okay. And then I don't know if they talk about actually using it in the app.
Down below, you get to the client side. There you go, client integration.
Yep. Add a keyed client, which we haven't done yet. Add a database. Oh, well, see, that's not it.
Right. Because we don't have a keyed client. We have one client.
Yeah. We have this.
Yes. At least that's how I was interpreting it.
What I'm wondering, what I was trying to figure out is this just going to roll through to the API? And I guess it will.
If you include it, and that's something we can try. If you include them as a reference, then we should be able to dependency inject just like we did with the Cosmos client.
Yeah, look, it is right here. When you add a Cosmos DB resource in the app host project, you can also add a container resource as well. It is considered a child resource. In your client consuming project, you can deep link to the container by name, registering a container instance for use with dependency injection. That might have been the trick right there.
So then doing this.
So then you don't even have, you just pass in the container, and it's one less piece to pass through in dependency injection.
Yep. So we can get rid of that. If you want to bring my screen back.
Sorry.
Up.
Yeah, let me get you back in there.
Yeah. So let me undo that. So all I did was I got rid of the Cosmos client that was sitting here, swapped in the container.
Yep.
Calling it metadata container, so it's consistent with what we had over there. We no longer need this.
Right.
We no longer need this. 1, 2, 3 clicks. Come on. 1, 2, 3. There we go. And we no longer need this because this now becomes.
It's basically just, yeah, exactly. It's coming in with dependency injection.
And I suppose for completeness, we'll do F2 and say underscore. Container. If I could spell. Oh, that was horrible.
Yeah. So like you said, we had Waleed join us, and says, thanks for always diving deep and making complex topics approachable. Keep rocking the .NET Dev world. Thank you very much for that. And certainly, I think sometimes where we feel we get lost, and hopefully it's still interesting, is when it's going beyond the tutorial. And then it's like, wow, we just spent like 20 minutes on that. And well, the YouTube world says your videos should be very short. But then, you know, I do think sometimes there's a gap between, okay, I read it in the docs. How does it work?
Right.
And hopefully you saw us earlier when we stumbled into the topic of maintainable code and beautiful code. We're not necessarily talking about it right now, but it's a little bit of, as we were going over some of this work, asking ourselves, and you're seeing it right now, as we're asking ourselves, you know, how can we clean this up? And when have you gone too far? When are you over engineering? And when is it, hey, this is actually going to help? So that, now the interesting thing is getting this set up. So we've gotten this set up. We still need the API to deliver this, right?
Right. So this is all right. So we don't need that right now. Where is program for API? Right. So to your point, we're scoped for that service, and this is our API program.cs. So when the API runs, we've got our dependency injection to bring in that Cosmos metadata repository that we just modified for when we go here on the metadata endpoints and bring in something that implements IA metadata repository. It's easy. There's only one thing. It's the Cosmos one. So it's going to bring that into here. And then that's going to give us the metadata repository where we call, in this case, we're doing a updating of the metadata. We could probably go here and seeing actually creating the metadata the first time around, which is what we need. And then in creating that metadata, we're using something that implements the metadata definition base class as an item. And if you remember, we have our down here, our event status definition, which we haven't taken a look at yet. Essentially, it is a property of event status definition, which uses the type of event status. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you go back and look at our F12, sorry. This is what that metadata implements. Yes, we're setting for that particular property to be the event status for the type. That's what that was doing. But then also it'll have an ID that gets created in Cosmos. It'll have a value of what that is, a display name, a description, is it active or not, and then is there a sort order. So all the things we kind of need if we're going to put this in a drop down, right? We could maybe have properties that still exist, but they're not active, so you can't assign them anymore, so that the metadata doesn't break for things where we deprecate, hey, you can't cancel items anymore, you can't have things online anymore, right? Those kind of properties that we may not want to use. So that's, I think, gives us enough complexity to handle many of the scenarios that we might want to do. But now this metadata definition, as we saw here, gets implemented in the exact property that we want to create. So in this case, the event status property has all of those fields, but in addition also has that type to be just event status. So we could, so the goal is inside of that metadata container, there are going to be a number of items that have event status as the type, so that when we say, okay, go get me all of the event status objects, because I want to go ahead and populate a dropdown with it, it's easy for us to do that with that one call. And I think that's where, if we go back to the metadata endpoints, we've got our create. Used to be a way to collapse all these. We've got our create metadata there, our update metadata there, our delete metadata there, and that's it. And that's not enough. So here, get specifically, get event statuses. So this should be get all metadata items async, where they're that model. And they're that model because the type has that value in it. So given where we are now, if we run it, we should be able to call the API, create an item by passing in that JSON.
Well, have we set up enough? Have we set up, so back in your repository, the Cosmos metadata repository, we are saying that we're going to get the container by dependency injection, but have we made that a reality in the Orbital API program CS?
Orbital
the container,
API.
Yes. So in here, where is dependency injection getting that container? Right now, I don't think we've defined that yet.
And I don't, so from what you just showed in the documentation, and the way I heard it was that app host gave us a metadata container, and then all we should need to do is with reference metadata container. So now that when I go to call, just like API was able to, well, I'll show it here because it still exists. Just like in this one, we're able to bring in, interesting, we're bringing that, I'm showing it the wrong place. Hang on one second. Let's say meeting repository. That's what it is. Meeting repository. And maybe we should just run instead of me saying what I think is happening. So if we look at the Cosmos meeting repository, when we instantiate that, we're going to bring in that Cosmos client. That Cosmos client came in because we defined it here at the app host.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're essentially bringing in that. Whereas, so yeah, any Cosmos client, we're going to call a client. And what we're doing over here on the metadata is that's great, but we're doing the same thing with the reference of a container and bringing in the metadata container here. So what I'll say is let's do this. And then we should be able to see that
Okay.
there's a container that lands there. Yeah, roughly.
I think I actually want to see what happens, but I think we might need to register the container in dependency injection, but let's see.
Is that
and we're going to find out pretty quickly.
Right, but is that what the docs state?
So there is a part where it talks about deep linking. In your client consuming project, you can deep link. Yeah, so you'll want to skip down from here quite a ways, actually. Keep going. That's adding a database, and then keep going from there, adding a container. That's exactly what I'm looking at right now. So in your client consuming project, you can deep link to the container resource by name, registering a container instance for use with dependency injection.
So this would be where we go connection name : metadata container.
Yeah, except that the odd thing about it is that when they say add Azure Cosmos container, let me come back and take a look. It says connection name is details, and in their sample, because this all was based off a sample, details is referenced as a container. Yes. So basically what we have here, what are we in now? We're in the API. So we need a builder
program. Yep.
Yep, there it is. Right. Did you just add it? Yeah.
I just added it. Yeah.
Okay. We don't want details. We want it to be whatever you've called it. Yep. And then I think the only thing left to do is make sure that which you may have already done, in the app host program CS, that you've already built that reference, that metadata container reference. Yep. Right, and the API has a reference to it. So that might be all the wiring, I think.
Cool. I think so. I think the tricky bit is getting us to be able to run and debug and test this. I should be able to. I thought I had.
Yeah.
Maybe it was.
It should work. This should work when you click there, because I've done this now a few times. What did it pick? Did it in the drop down? It picked Orbital App Host, right? Yeah, it did. So that's one of the things I found as like a first time setup where you say, okay, it says launch startup project. Well, what is your startup project? And then once you set it, I'm not sure where it's hiding it. Like it might be hiding it in workspace settings of VS Code.
I think so.
Because we're not putting it in this isn't something that we're putting in a VS Code folder. So for one thing, everything just popped up. So that's a good sign. And you were saying, right, it's all green, which of course means everything works, right?
Exactly. All right, we're done, right?
Yeah.
So if we go to Explorer, we should have two, and we do, right? We now have two.
And that wasn't there, huh?
It was not there.
Okay.
That was my first time running all that.
Yeah.
So that's cool. That's what we would expect. Now, what we want to do, if we go back to here, is we want to be able to hit the Orbital API.
Right.
On 7024.
Yep.
And
we have our HTTP file, which we probably got to clean up a little bit here.
That's okay.
Because see right there, that host address is 5046 for some reason. But and it's for the weather forecast, so we don't need that.
Okay. What did we say it was? 7042?
I think that's what you said. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
7024.
7024. Wow. It only took 10 seconds to forget what that was.
And the little bit of power of my suggestion, was that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the orbital host address. Now, why is that red squiggle?
Hold on.
Because I should be able to reference it that way.
Well, anyways, let's just see what happens. It's not complaining anymore, is it? Oh, it still is.
It is still.
Is the dot invalid?
Is the dot invalid? Interesting.
Where it says orbital dot API?
I mean, it had to have been in there before, right? Oh, there you go. It likes that.
Well, it's good enough for now.
And so we have to go look at our metadata endpoints. So we want the one that says metadata, which is fine. And do we want to try and create it via code?
Well, you can just create one right now just to see this work.
Okay. So metadata. So we probably should have gotten rid of that because we don't have an admin group right now. We don't have anything that's going to see if it's authorized.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's just rerun that. And then the other question I had was in here. Oh, shoot. No, these admin group. I see what it did there.
I wonder if you could leave that just taken off the require authorization and you'd have been fine.
All right, good point. Let's try that because it's not working the way I had it. So Control Z, do this. Let's. Okay. So when we're saying map group /admin,
it should make the endpoint. I guess it'll be /admin
after that.
Well, so maybe that's getting added. Yeah, that's a new one. That's just /admin.
But it's coming off of group. Oh, okay. But group /admin.
Oh man, I think you're right. Because what happens up at the top? I guess I can look myself too because I do have it.
That's okay. So there's group app.map.
Yeah.
Group.
Okay. So it's like a group underneath there. So it's like /API /metadata /admin. Okay.
I think
that's
so.
Fine. I mean, that can get.
I just want to make sure we hit the right URL. That's
all. Exactly. We'll be hunting around for where it actually is.
All right. So that's going to give us this, and to do that, we've got to pass in a item. So that's our JSON is going to be that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we go back. So let's save this. Let's rerun it, which should get us in the right space. Go back to our API here. Accept JSON, metadata, whack, admin, whack, nothing.
No, that was a get.
Right. So we want to post.
I can't remember. Okay, yeah. So you got to switch it to a post, and then what else is going on here?
We got to put the JSON object down here, right?
Yep.
We're going to need type. Type is going to be event status. And we get that from this here, right? So that's all jiving up. So that's good. We do want to put a value here. And that value should be, let's say, scheduled, right? Because this is the value of the item that we're created. So description, name. And this is all coming out of what we have in.
Yeah, schema.org has an event scheduled enumeration. I mean, an event status type enumeration. So
that might have been where the, yeah, that's okay. This one here, it's all coming out of this property. So we need display name, we need description, is active, and sort order as well. I know, sorry. This is boring watching the type happen, but almost there. Oh, that probably needs some quotes too. Oh, have you seen this? I'm sorry to digress, but if you highlight it and just type in something that surrounds like that, then one click and you're there. So that's pretty cool. Last thing, sort order, I believe. Yes. And that's a integer. Cool. Yes. Good point. There is a tab in Visual Studio for Endpoint Explorer, right? Because it's looking at the APIs you're creating in code. I don't know if we have an equivalent in VS Code, but that's a good thing to consider. Interesting. There might be an extension or a plugin for that. I'm not aware of one, but that might be what it is. Okay.
I actually am looking for that right now. So.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah. Metadata endpoints, if we're just doing a create, it should just be a slash. If we're doing an update, it also is a slash. And if we're doing delete, slash type slash ID. So there probably ultimately should be, well, we do get to get up here about getting everything that is a collection. So let's just for right now, see if that worked. Yeah, what could go wrong, right?
Oh, what a great idea. So yes, Visual Studio has the Endpoints Explorer, which you're not using right now, but look at this. Sometimes use Copilot to scan the API routes and then generate the request in an HTTP file. Isn't that great?
That's cool.
Like after we beat our heads against the wall trying to get it right.
Yeah.
Just have Copilot generate the HTTP file. Yeah. That's nice. Great. I love that idea. Thank you, Wally. That's awesome. So how did this go? Did we...
It said something about a socket.
Okay.
Do I have this?
The application going?
Sorry, I'm gonna get the right one. Yeah, we're running. Oh, because it's not
HTTPS. Yeah.
Yep. Let's go here. Okay. Try it again. 404 not found. All right. My buddy Copilot.
404 not found. Yeah, I wonder if it's trying to say you don't have event statuses. So, I mean, I haven't gone through this code here.
Let's try this. So
we think that's where we landed, right? We landed here on line 54.
Yeah, although I did not breakpoint it.
So on line 54, interesting, because we got a 404. And did you switch that from get to post?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it should be, I mean, I think that's what I had. This post endpoint express. Okay, so let's go back to this. Maybe there's 2 slashes there because I've got that. So then it's /API/metadata /admin.
Yes. That very well could be it.
Take the one off the end.
I don't know that matters as much.
Yeah. Okay. But certainly having the double in the middle might.
Okay. I think better.
Media type. That's good. Expected a supported JSON media type, but got.
Okay, so let's go back to there. So we're saying that we accept application JSON, but I think what we really need is we need a content type header, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Save that. Let's try that.
Okay.
Well, not so bad. That's better.
All right.
Deserialization of the interface or abstract type is not supported.
Right. But so you're in the method.
We know that. So we should be able to. So if we're in the method, let's see. I mean, we should be able to hit that breakpoint, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And metadata, get that. I mean, unless it's choking at the service before it even gets down to the metadata.
I don't think so. I think this is going to end up being in the post method. That's what I think.
In the post method. Okay, so, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back here, right in this method.
Right. Oh, look, we can add and remove each other's breakpoints. That's cool.
Okay. I'm wondering what's going on with that thing.
I was wondering if that worked, and sure enough, it does. So,
boy, that'll drive it crazy. Let's see. All right, so let's try that again. This one.
You know what's interesting is you're running and it shows the app running on my end. Can I call that from my machine? I mean, I feel like I should know all this stuff because haven't we done this before? Oh, no, the host doesn't allow running this command. If needed, ask them to enable it. Okay. I guess not.
So system not support. So does that, okay, so here's the thing. Does this...
I think when we get to the actual method, there's going to be a problem with how things are being done.
Right, but it's not even breaking there. It's breaking before that. Like I don't even get to that first line in the method.
Okay, I hear you.
So what I'm wondering is, does this need to be...
It might be that all the way back here, it blew up and said, I'm sorry, I can't even serialize this to send it to Web API.
Right. I mean, is that a thing?
It being an abstract class maybe is a problem. You know
Mm.
why it might be a problem? Because it can't instantiate it.
Oh.
You can't instantiate an abstract class. So whatever
Well,
we're derived off of is what it's looking for.
yeah.
So I wonder if what the API. Well, okay, I wasn't 100% sure if API design was going to be an issue yet, but
It might
I
be.
wonder if we're trying to do too much where there's an API that creates metadata types, and then the problem is, where do you store that exactly? Because I don't think that's something that's not something that's part of the that's the types that are available is not being stored in the repository.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe we need to take that and make that an abstract class, or not make it an abstract class, because it is looking for that item there and isn't translating to the one that we brought in until it finds out what type we're using.
yeah, right.
Although that's interesting, it's not typing the item; it's keeping the item the same. It's trying to write it as a metadata definition item instead of being typed, which I think you would want it to be.
The problem is, I think what we're running into is ASP.NET Core is trying to serialize a metadata definition, and probably in order to do so needs to instantiate one. Whereas what your object hierarchy is saying is it could be any type of metadata definition. It could, but see, the API doesn't know, because when it comes in, it's not coming in as an event status. It's not coming in as so it just doesn't know.
Yeah, and I think what we might need to do is have something in here. Maybe this is more of an interface that needs to be put in place, right? So that
it might be more like a DTO.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a step where you transform the DTO into its final form.
Yep, based on the type that comes in, because that's how we're classifying all of those.
Yeah. But I'm curious if this will store it at the very least, just to see it work, right?
Yep, that's the goal. All right. Did it come back? No.
Did you restart it? I don't know.
I did. Cancel.
Okay.
No, I don't want to do that. Let's close that down. I did restart.
Okay. Then if you restarted it, then I think we can go back to the HTTP file, right?
Let me just do this because it seems like it's hanging up on something. It says it's running. All right.
Do you have the dashboard up?
There you go.
Oh, interesting.
I also have. Nope, that's gone now.
I guess maybe just start it over, right? At this point.
Yeah. If it's not. Yeah. All right. Go to sleep. Come back.
Oh, you didn't have to do that, I don't think.
Still loading. Debugging, wait for projects. Okay. Sorry, I'm impatient. All right, that's better. that service is up. So if we go here now, fingers crossed. Failed to read parameter. So we got to convert it. Deserialize the JSON.
That doesn't make sense.
Oh, the thing is active.
I wonder if, does it need to be?
Well, it's complaining about that. And I think Boolean probably doesn't need the quotes around it.
Well, that's true.
Boolean value is a string.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, let's try that. Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, so we've actually gotten past the model binding now.
I think
now it's trying to say I couldn't find metadata container. So let's
go back to that document.
One thing we didn't do that is slightly different is there's no reference to the database, where if you go all the way down to parent-child resource relationship example, which I think maybe it's further up actually.
No, this one.
Yeah. You see how in their example, the API took a reference to the profiles, which is profiles is a container, details was a container, history. Oh, no, you're right. It does not take a reference to the database itself. Like they don't even bother.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even bother. Yeah. So.
Or no reference to the Cosmos client either. So we gave the client as well as the container.
Right. Like it just didn't even bother. And then in the app where they're consuming it.
Just down here. That's client database.
They say add Azure Cosmos container connection name and details, customers. Which I think we did.
Let me make sure. So they called it customers down there. And they called it customers here.
You didn't go far enough. You went to add Azure Cosmos DB database. Then a little bit further down, they have add Azure Cosmos DB container. Yeah. So there's the client, adding a database, and then one more to add a container.
Okay. And I think that, so that's the details container. And just to go back up to see that bit. Details is what they called it here, as well as here. Okay. Right. So that should be fine because metadata object or metadata container is what we called it.
So what does it look like in our app again?
Yeah. Let's get rid of this. So in our app, we have metadata repository, which we are passing in a container called metadata container, which should be not here, from the app registration or from the app host, including that reference just like they did.
Okay. And then in our API's program CS?
API program CS, which is this one. Yep. We have Cosmos client.
Okay. So here's the issue. Here's the issue. Go back to the app host program CS. So the connection name we gave it is metadata container. What's the connection name we gave it in app host? In app host, however, it's not called metadata container, believe it or not. So go back to the app host program. Okay, on line 20, we said add container, and the reference string we gave it was metadata.
See, now this is where the documentation
it's where it's confusing.
Because it's called the same at both ends.
Right. Okay. So They didn't. They use the same variable name. Now you want to leave that alone. If I remember the add container, yes, add container method. The resource name is the first string.
This one here.
So if we want it to match up what's in the API right now, we want to call that metadata container. Now here's what's confusing about this, right?
Yeah.
Is in order to reference it in code a few lines later, we assign it to a variable.
Yes.
But just because we assigned it to a variable, that variable could say eat at Joe's. It doesn't matter. As far as .NET Aspire is concerned, it's called metadata container.
It's called this because
yes, it's called that.
Because this item here, the scope of this item is the app host program CS. So once that's done, it's done.
It's gone, right? So what's kind of unfortunate, and maybe this is just the confusion of it, is that you can't somehow keep that name in sync on line 27, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I think that's the issue. I think what's happening is service discovery went looking for metadata container because that's what the API said to go look for. And it's like,
All right, so let's try that. So it's exiting the program, it's rebuilding. So that's done. Get the dashboard. There we go. Kill the old dashboard. And now we go back to this, find our HTTP endpoint, and say, all right, let's go. It hit a breakpoint.
So we got into here finally. Yep.
Yep. So this is our container, right? So it has our client and all that stuff in there. So we can
like, I don't know if we can just F5 through it or what.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And then we ended up blowing up somewhere else. So
create container async. It happened in the core live, but it's handled in the user code.
So a Cosmos exception instead.
Yeah.
And it really didn't give us much.
It did not. I wonder if it's well, so two things. One, let's go here and just make sure nothing got created. Yeah, it probably is. We can figure this out later. Just do this. Back to the HTTP thing. F5 it so it moves along. It's fine. Does this tell me? Status does not indicate success. So let's just do this.
Oh, document does not contain an ID field. Look at that.
Yeah.
I think that could be anything, right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. It should be some GUID, right? Because we want them all to be unique.
Yep.
Let's try that again.
You don't have a comma on line 8.
We can get rid of this because we know we're here. Let's just do F5. Yep.
Oh.
Document does not contain an ID field, but it does.
Do you have an ID in the metadata item?
That's what it's trying to do. Got it. Okay. You're right. I did not. So if I do this.
Well, there it is. It's right there.
Yep.
But does it have to be capitalized?
So
I feel like we dealt with all this with the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because what should happen is it looks like it's trying to. Yeah. So if we go back to, sorry, let's save this. Let's go back to this. No, this one. If it's null or empty, it's trying to add one for us, and it didn't have one that had that signature on it. That's my guess. So let's leave that where it is and we should be fine because we just changed the metadata, or we just changed the object that we're sending. So let's do this one more time.
So it got through there, which is interesting. And then it didn't work when you added it yourself. So there might be something else missing that we're just that we're missing.
Yeah, let me try one more thing. Come of that. Oh. Something in here so that this way it doesn't have to worry about figuring it out. Still didn't. Looks like it still didn't like it. It came back with the same error.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Yeah.
You have to get my day going, even though it's a holiday for us here in the U.S. But in any case, that's why we had like this extra long show. But yeah, we covered a lot of stuff. It'd be I would like to think maybe a little bit later this weekend I can go chapter it. That would be nice. But hey, we covered a lot of things. We actually learned a little bit about .NET Aspire, and probably will adjust the rest of the app maybe to, because we're sending so much stuff along that maybe we don't have to, so we can work through that. We got some great help from Waleed. Thank you very much. I love how he's now given me the idea to just have, if you happen to be in VS Code and don't have the Endpoints Explorer, let's have Copilot look at the app and generate an HTTP file for us. So that's pretty cool too.
Sorry, that one.
Yeah, it's like a big mess. I really wish that there was a way. I think the problem for me is that particular feature of StreamYard. I think I've said this a million times, probably even on the show, is that if you make a change on a scene, it changes the scene, and I wish it would lock it and be like, no, I don't want to change the scene. I want to have to switch scenes, but it doesn't do it. So in any case, I want to thank everybody who joined us today. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully some of the discussions, like I said, I think chaptering this one would be so helpful just to kind of go, because we talked about different things at different times, and it was impossible to get it all in the title, but maybe I'll try anyway, because we did a little .NET Aspire, a little bit of Azure Cosmos DB, a little bit of just like API design, which I think we'll get to talk about as well. Yeah. So that's it.
Cool. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, this was really good. Nice that we got to do a little bit longer of a show. Hopefully people enjoy it. And don't forget, you can always watch any show from the past on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedevtalkshow. So if you aren't catching us from there, I mean, if you are catching us from YouTube, you already know.
Right.
But otherwise, back on Monday?
Yeah, I think so. Monday's
all right.
Monday's good.
All right. We will look to be back on Monday once again. Really appreciate everybody who joined us live. And then if you're watching in the future and you have any comments on anything we did today, don't hesitate to leave it below. And we'd love to know what techniques you're using, what works for you. We got great help from Waleed. So that's what we're looking for. This isn't, this is definitely a conversation with all of you. So everyone, if you're in the US, no matter where you are, have a great weekend. A lot of folks in the US have a happy and safe 4th of July, no matter what you're doing. I imagine a lot of us are heading outside. It looks like a gorgeous day.
So awesome.
Yeah. So for Rich, I am Chris, and we'll see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.